technology. My name is Guthrie. I am here with Susan. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Guthrie.
And what is our topic today?
Well, we picked today to talk about the ROI of UX, lots of letters. So the return on investment of doing user experience work.
This is a topic we get asked about a lot.
This is a really popular topic, and I think it's kind of interesting to us because, we've given a webinar on it. I've written white papers on it in the past, and so in my head, it's like, okay, it's all done. We've done it. We've talked about it, but it never ceases to be of interest to people, and I think I know why that is too. So anyway, which we can talk about, but I figured, all right, if it's going to be that popular, and we haven't done a podcast episode on it, we should do that.
So, return on investment.
Yeah.
Sounds businessy.
Yeah, it does sound businessy, which I think is one reason why some people kind of find it intimidating. But the basic idea...
And it's an acronym.
Huh?
It's an acronym, too.
It is, yeah.
Scary.
So I think that, it's interesting. Like there, if something is... Here's my take on it. If something is really widely accepted, then you don't have to go around talking about what is the return on investment of doing this thing. So I know that I used to get frustrated because, I would be asked, well, should we really be doing this user experience or UX work in order to make the product, more usable or, whatever we were working on. And often, especially in a large organization, sometimes even in a small one, someone would ask, well, is it worth it? Should we be spending the money? What's the ROI? And I always felt like saying, have you asked what is the ROI of doing the programming? Because, it's like, why are we questioning this? We don't question everything about putting out a product. Why do you question this part? To me, it always was a sign that there were some people in the organization who didn't feel the UX work, whether that is, the UX design or spending time to make sure, the product's easy to use, or whether it was doing user testing at the end or whatever it is, they just didn't see it as of value and worthwhile.
So
to me, that's I always thought that's one reason why people would be asking for this.
So let's put this in context, especially, and I'm going to put on my little business. I'm at a conference now. I'm at a business conference. You're on a panel.
You're not really at a business conference.
I'm at a business conference right now. That's a lie.
Yeah. You're saying hypothetically.
Yeah. Okay. So, Dr. Weinschenk, how would you frame this, especially in terms of an agile development world?
Okay, I don't even want to go there.
Okay, but we can circle back. I only wanted to bring it up because I think there is a difference between how you look at budgets and how you get return on investment. And often, when you're working in a company with a team, projects are on this project basis. So what is the project, the cost to do this the project?
Yeah.
And then how much do you make out of it? And so a lot of when you're just doing the short-term calculations of ROI, there's the first part, which is, let's say maybe we get more clicks, right? And so after 6 months, we'll have more clicks, which will lead to more checkouts, which mean more money.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay, so if we do UX, then we'll get more clicks, and that's good because we can put a number on that. But our argument often is you need to look at on a longer scale.
Well, and to me, actually, I don't think what you're talking about really is getting very clear essentially on how you're going to do your return on investment calculation. It can be short term, it can be long term. And I do think it's useful. I do think it's useful for a team, especially, to have a discussion about how would we measure the success of the UX work so that you can focus in on what are, again, another fancy phrase, key indicators, but really you're asking, how do we define success in terms of the quality of the user experience for this product? And I think that's a great conversation to have, even if you didn't have to, let's say you had unlimited budget and you didn't have to calculate the ROI because you're trying to convince someone to do the UX work. It's still useful to talk about. And I think it's interestingly one of the things that either doesn't get discussed or doesn't, if it is discussed, the answers are not necessarily passed on to the UX people. So if you're on a project and you're doing, you're responsible for the UX of the project, do you know whether it's more important to have a short-term show like the number of clicks or a reduction in the amount of abandonment at an e-commerce shopping cart, or is success measured in a reduction in the number of phone calls or chat messages, or in a reduction in the amount of time it takes employees to get trained on the software? So whatever it is, right? Does everyone agree that is the most, these are the one or two or maybe three most important measurements of the user experience success? And so you have to go through that process if you're going to calculate an ROI. You have to decide, what is your indicator, and how would you even begin to measure it? And so I think that level of conversation is really useful. I guess, many of us, and I'm probably included in that, kind of bristle at the idea that we have to justify the work we do by, doing the calculations. But, as I said, putting that aside, it's even just useful to have the conversation and get clear on it.
And I don't want to get too much into the details yet, because I just want people to just start thinking about, because I do think I know you didn't want to talk about Agile, but I do think it's important, because a big part of, there are certain things in the UX process that you don't need to do very often. Like, once you have an understanding, for example, of who your users are, that's something you can use again and again and again, regardless of if you're making, one landing page here or a search bar there or whatever it is. It's like this, you've put in the initial investment and then you can reuse it. Whereas a lot of dev projects, right? You hire a quadrillion programmers, they cost a fortune. You do a new platform, right? You have it's all going on a new platform that's going to be better than the old platform. It works. Everyone pats each other on the back, right? And then in 2.5 years, someone new is there, and they look at this is so bad. We need to we're gonna redo it, right? And you do the whole thing over again every 2 years, and it's very, very expensive. Whereas
so what's your question?
Well, right. So if you had done some of the UX stuff, then you don't have to start maybe from scratch every 2 years. Maybe every 2 years it just needs a little bit of an update.
Maybe.
But
although,
instead of this is, I don't know, that's my.
Although from a technical point of view, that you do decide to change the platform, there is a better way to do it, and you're redoing it all. And I guess that's back to my, okay, is anyone stopping to ask about the ROI of reprogramming this all on the new platform? But
I just try to get people to think on this on like a scale of several several years instead of just this year, because some of the stuff that the investment that you put into UX can last for many years.
It can,
just 1 or 2.
Might not. Also, you
might
have to redo some of the UX when you have a new platform too. But can I can we actually back up?
Yeah, sure.
Can I tell you the story of the first time that I realized that dealing with this ROI thing and doing an ROI calculation for UX might be an extremely good idea?
What?
Okay, so I had heard about doing return on investment calculations. I had read a book about ROI it was probably for usability, because I think it was long enough ago that it was before the UX term was being used. And I had lots of doubts and, didn't think we should have to do that. And I think the other thing that happens, or at least happened for me and other people I knew, we kind of, it was like, well, of course it's important to make it, easy to use and usable and a good experience and all of that. So we didn't want to have to justify it with a calculation. So I had never done an ROI calculation, even though I knew about it and had read a book on it. So then I was doing some consulting work with my client, and this was let's just say it is a large bank that still exists. And we were doing work on the project, and then he was talking to me about doing more work and expanding the scope of the project. And then he said there's a meeting of kind of like the VPs, and they want us to present, what we're planning on doing, why it's important, and they want us to share with them an ROI calculation. And I was like, So he wanted me to do an ROI calculation. Now, he didn't know how to do one on UX, and I had never done one on UX. So I got, my book out that I'd read in my notes, and I said, okay, I can do this. I'm going to do an ROI calculation, which I did. So if you would indulge me for a moment, I actually have I'm opening it up here. I have the initial ROI calculation.
Okay.
And let's just say this was before this millennial.
This millennial?
This millennium.
Okay.
So it was in the 1990s, okay?
Okay.
All right. So this was, the product we were working on was software. It wasn't web stuff. It was software for bank tellers. All right?
Okay.
And there were 5,000 users because they were bank tellers all over the place. The software product that they currently had was really very difficult user experience. It was very hard to learn, hard to use. It was old stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So we assumed, here were our assumptions and our key indicators. First of all, we assumed that given the way the software was right now, people were wasting 5 seconds per transaction. And that they were doing 100 transactions per person per day. So we needed these numbers in order to do the calculation. So what we did was we took 5,000 people times 100 transactions times 5 seconds. Okay? That gives you 2.5 million seconds, which is 41,666 minutes, which is 694 hours. So we calculated that there were 694 hours being wasted. Times $7 an hour, because this was 1994 and bank tellers didn't get paid very much then. They probably still don't. But we figured then, because of this wasted time, you were wasting $4,858 a day times 252 days a year. I don't know why we had 252. Oh, because, they're not open weekends and stuff. And so we figured that if we fixed this software and made it easier to use, we'd save $1.2 million a year.
Yeah.
Now, okay, but that's not all, okay? We also figured we could take the training, because right now they had people come in for 2 weeks to learn how to use the software. And they had to, fly them in and spend 2 weeks. So we figured we'd save at least $1,000 in training costs for every new person. Now, they had a high turnover because this kind of job usually has a high turnover. They had 10% turnover. So that's 500 people a year times $1,000. That's $500,000 per year in training saved. And then we also figured there'd be savings with the help desk. We thought we could reduce the calls by half. We could save 300 calls a month. And we knew the cost per call had been calculated at $10. So that was $3,000 a month or $36,000 a year. So when you add that all up, 1.2 million, 500,000, 36,000, etc., we came up with $1,760,000 savings in the first year, and that the cost to fix it, to make these fixes, would take $500,000, which I don't even think it did take anywhere near that. But we were trying to, be conservative.
Yeah.
So then you take 1,760,000 minus 500,000 divided by 500,000, and we could talk about that. How do you get that? Anyway, we came up with an ROI calculation of 252%. Now, when we presented this to the VPs, and I was really nervous. And in fact, I didn't believe these numbers because they were so high.
Mm-hmm.
So I recalculated them 5 times. And so then I had to get out and present this to these VPs, and I was really nervous because I had never done this. And I'm not a finance VP.
Right.
And I'm spouting all these numbers, and they're going to laugh at me. They're going to say, that's ridiculous. Why'd you pick those numbers? So I got up there, I ran through all these numbers, and, came up with the savings, $1.2 million savings in the first year. And I was done, and there was silence in the room, and I'm like, oh, no. And then this one woman, this one VP says, okay, 3.
Yeah.
And I said 3, I'm like, what is she saying, 3? And I thought, okay, I have 3 seconds to get out of the building.
2, 1. Yeah.
Right. And she said, well, if we can save, this much money by doing one of these, usability projects, if we do 3, then we'll save, $4 million or whatever, 3 times 1.2 or whatever. And she totally didn't get what we were going to do with the project, but she was so enamored of it, she wanted 3 of them. She thought saving $4 million would be even better. And then I had to explain, no, actually it doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
But they said, yeah, this looks great, go do it, when I had presented the numbers. So that's
pretty rare, right?
Yeah, because normally you go in and you say, we want to spend $500,000, or even we want to spend, $25,000, right, on this UX project. And, usually people are like, do you have to, right? But in this case, they were like, this is great, go do it, right? So that made me really change my mind about ROI calculations. Now, after that, I've done many of them. And what's really important in this then is to pick, again, that idea of, what are you measuring? I mean, and the one I walked you through, this was internal software. And so, we decided to figure out time saved by the employee and the training and the help desk stuff. But that might not be what you pick for, a particular project. There's just this, large choices you have in what you pick. So, you could pick reduction in training costs, which is one of the things we picked. You could pick savings of users' time. But here's some other things you might choose instead. So you might have reduction of errors, Maybe if you're in a situation where errors are really expensive or disastrous, then you want, that's what you want to, do your calculation based on, right? The cost of each kind of this type of error is this much, and if we, make the experience better, we'll have 30% less of those errors, right? You might do that. A real obvious one is the conversion rate, right? How many people, if it's a website or e-commerce site, how many people that come to the site actually make the purchase, right? So that's a real common one. So then you might be based on the average order value or something like that. Sometimes people, I had one where the important measurement was the increase in the number of pages viewed. And that was because they were on this weird kind of advertising model where the more pages that people viewed, the more money they made.
Yeah.
A decrease in cart abandonment might be one. Here's one. I've done some that were based on saving not the user's time, but the development time.
Yeah,
If
sure.
we do this work, then development will go faster. So there's all kinds of things that you can measure, but you have to figure out, in order to do these calculations, what are we going to measure? And it has to be something measurable. So, you can't just, if you just say, we're going to base it on increased user satisfaction. Well, that's fine, but how do you measure that? And which is good. I mean, you can come up with ways to measure that, but you have to have something concrete because you got to get to the point where you can put a number on it.
Now, I came up with a whole system.
Yeah,
which was much more complicated than this.
Very complicated. Yeah,
That
I remember.
had to do with you calculate
risk. You were calculating
value
risk
based on probability. So if we have a better, let's say we have a better checkout page.
Yeah.
It conservatively increases the chance that someone completes their checkout by 5%.
Yeah.
Right? It's a 5% probability increase.
Yeah.
And maybe on the optimal version it's 10%.
Yeah.
And maybe on the negative version it's, on the very conservative it's 2%.
Yeah.
We know how many drop-offs we have at our conversion page, and so you can take your probability and you multiply it by your actionable items that you already have data for, and you can create real values on regular estimates, optimistic and pessimistic estimates.
Yeah, I like that. We had a whole spreadsheet. As I recall.
It appears to be too complicated for most people in the UX world.
Yeah, most people don't want to go through. Well, I get that.
I came up with this whole thing, and
then nobody wanted
to do it. You've given this webinar a couple times with our friends at I forget who
User Zoom. User Zoom.
Yeah, so we do a webinar with User Zoom, and basically we've done this webinar a lot, and then sometimes you just run it straight. And one of the earlier ones, I came up with this whole system, and you explained it. And it was too much.
Yeah, people didn't want to.
But I'm an economist, and so the way you, that's
the way you do it.
That's the way you do it.
So I want to give. Can I give some more examples?
But now before you do, I have another question, by the way.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Okay.
What's the that last example you gave is the best example, and it's a beautiful one. But it was also back in the day when stuff was designed really, really poorly.
Yeah.
You had less options. It was much harder to make something look nice, or, the interfaces were very clunky. They didn't have the auto sorts and drop-down menus and way to organize information that we do today. So it was just not to say that that the design was better or worse, but there were just more tools at your disposal to come up with a system that. There are more tools at your disposal today to come up with a system and software that is relatively easier to use. It was easier to do a really, really bad job back in the day. And I direct you to the millions of Angel Fire websites and MySpace pages that are now lying in the graveyard of the internet.
Yes.
So our UX teams, and I specifically asked because right now UX teams there are more UX teams than ever before, and they're doing less UX than ever because it's so much of the development time has been shortened by the agile process that everyone's doing. So there's just less low-hanging fruit for ROI? You know, like back when you were doing that project, maybe it was really, and that said, I'm sure, you know, everyone's competitors had really bad UIs as well. But now that everyone has a UI team, and if you do have a bad UI, your competitor probably has a great UI, which is, you know, and so it's like, so is there just less? So the effect on the consumer would be less, right? If you're the only one on the block with a great UI, then you're going to get all kinds of, you know, new business and customers and that kind of stuff. Whereas if there's a bunch of competitors, you know, maybe the market is used to that and you won't have as big of a bump. So my very long-winded question is, do you think there's the return on UI is getting smaller over time overall?
No.
Okay.
Well, here's why I say
that's
that.
fine, but you know, right? It's a valid
I
question.
absolutely understand your question. I do, and there was a lot of low-hanging fruit then, but you know, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit now too, and now I think in many cases the stakes are higher, you know, because there's a lot of competition, and it's just amazing though to me, even though there are a lot of people now who understand, you know, there are many more people now who in the world who understand that what usable, you know, that's a word, that's a concept, that user experience is a concept, that it's important to design for it. And as you said, there's many, you know, UX teams and people working on designing products that are more usable and have a better user experience. But there's still, for a variety of reasons, so it's probably another podcast episode, there's still, you know, from a human factors point of view, errors that designers and product owners are making in their products. And so, you know, there's still reasons why people abandon shopping carts, and there's still software where there's this one little thing that they hid, and therefore, you know, people aren't, you know, are having to redo the task because they did it wrong the first time. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's still there, and there's still need for it, and I think that there's still need to sometimes to justify what you're doing and why you're doing it, and what you're concentrating on. And I do think, you know, I hope that soon we're going to do a podcast episode about some of our new thoughts about Agile and UX, because we actually had some interesting conversations and thought about this just a couple weeks ago when we were traveling. But I think that there's a lot of pressure on UX teams to really focus and concentrate on what's important to work on. And even in places that have UX teams in place, and even in organizations where there's always, you know, UX people involved on every project, you can't work on everything. You can't do everything. You've got to prioritize. So even just doing ROI calculations in order to help you decide where to put your UX resources, either in terms of a particular project or which projects to put it on, or, you know, what you can even use. I've used ROI calculations to decide which type of UX work is going to be, you know, provide the biggest impact for a particular project, or looking at all the projects we have for the upcoming year, which ones have the biggest ROI bang.
Yeah.
So I think there's many, many ways you can use this. And as I said, even just the going through the exercise of doing it so that the team comes to agreement on, what's the important measurement of success. I had a really interesting meeting one time with a client, and he was the product owner, and then he had his team there, right, which would be, some of the developers and UX people and some stakeholders, right? It wasn't a huge group. We had maybe like 6 people in the room, and so I asked the question because he wanted to talk about ROI, and I asked the question, what's the key indicator? What's the important measure of success for this product? And he looked at his team, and his team looked back at him, and no one could answer the question. No one could answer the question, and that
sometimes they're weird.
Yeah, and I think that's really common though, because often what happens, you're on a team and you're given here's the project we're working on, but it's not like anybody necessarily said to you, and here's why we're doing it, and here's what we really hope to improve. I mean, sometimes that conversation never happens, and ROI will force that. Anyway, I'm going to give you a couple more examples.
And I just want to say, sometimes you don't have the necessary, you don't have all it. It works best when you're a large bank company and you have a billion data points and
I want to talk about that. Actually, I do want to talk about that. I want to talk about what do you do, how do you get the data, even if you all came to agreement, right? Yeah. Okay, we're going to base our calculation on these indicators. How do you get the data, and how do you make these assumptions about how many users and all of that? So I want to talk about that in a minute, but first I'm going to give you a couple more examples, okay?
Okay.
So here was an ROI calculation we did. This is for a large online e-commerce retailer.
Okay.
So they did have data on shopping cart abandonment, and you got to believe me, this is a large e-commerce retailer. So they had 10,000 abandonments each day.
Okay.
Of the shopping cart.
Yeah.
Their average purchase was $36.
Okay.
So 36 times 10,000, right?
Yeah.
So there was a potential loss then of $360,000 each day. So they wanted the decision was to do user testing to figure out the problem. Why are there these abandonments? And then do the rework to fix the problem. And we estimated that was going to cost $75,000. Now, we also assumed we weren't going to reduce the abandonment 100%, because some people are abandoning not just because there's a problem, a user experience problem with the shopping cart, right?
Yeah.
People are abandoning because they decided not to buy it, or they looked somewhere else for a better price, or whatever, right? Yeah. So we figured we would see if we could reduce the abandonment by 25%. So we figured the usability issue would take away a quarter of the abandonments. Okay? So 2,500 people a day.
Sure.
Because 10,000 were abandoning, so 25%, 2,500 people a day, average of $36, $90,000 a day.
Yeah.
Times 365 days, because it's an online retailer, they're open every day. So they would save $32 million a year.
It's a lot of money. When you can scale, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. So we would spend $75,000, and they would save $32 million. Yes. So you get. I mean, these are huge numbers, and I always feel like the disclaimer, like your numbers may vary, right? Because you're only going to get large numbers like that when, when you have a lot of people doing something, or when it's worth a lot of money. And sometimes we don't have, that much. The numbers aren't like that. I'm going to look here in my examples and see if I think I have one that's maybe a little bit. No, I guess I don't. I mean, so you might have one, where, you have 1,000 or users, or maybe you're going to save 100 abandonments, right? And each abandonment is worth $10. And actually this is important, because there are times when it's like, okay, given our numbers, it's not worth it to spend $75,000 to fix this, because we're only going to make, $2,000 a year. So that's the other reason I think it's useful to kind of do the ROIs.
And it's,
right.
I mean, so, okay.
Yeah.
Did you have another thought? I have more questions.
Well, I wanted to talk about this issue of where do we get the data and how do we make assumptions, and do you want to ask a question?
No, go ahead.
Or do you want me to talk about that?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So sometimes people will say to me, okay, I don't have this data. I don't have data on how do you know you're going to reduce abandonment by 25% instead of 10% or 70%? How do you make that decision? How can you even know that? Where are you getting the data about the average purchase, right? So when you do these calculations, there are a lot of data. There's a lot of assumptions, and there's a lot of numbers, and there's a lot of decisions you have to make as you're going through. Like the one where I started with the bank teller, there was just a lot of decisions about how much does training cost and all of that. So, and here's just one little idea. If you make an assumption like, okay, let's assume that blah, 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 write it down. I cannot tell you how many times I'd be working on one of these and we'd make an assumption and no one would write it down. And then 20 minutes later, it would be like, wait, what was the number of, and then we had to backtrack and redo it. So I have filled up like whiteboards in office conference rooms with these calculations. So every time you make a data assumption, write it down so that it's clear. Okay, we're assuming that. If there is actual data, use the actual data. If you think you have current data but you're not sure, go ahead and do a draft calculation, but then go check to see if your data is accurate, and then change the calculations if you need to. If there's something in here that you just don't have, like I don't know how, we don't have data on how much of the abandonment is from user experience versus something else. We just don't have it. We're going to have to make an assumption. Then just note that this is an assumption. It doesn't come from actual data. And then the other thing I think is critical, be really conservative with all those assumptions. So if you think that actually you'll be able to save 50% of the abandonment, don't choose 50. Choose 25.
I was just reading a very interesting behavioral economics study for the research that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it was essentially all about it was basically why people make if you look at like building projects, right?
Yeah.
People they always make optimistic
estimates.
Yeah, they always make very optimistic
that's
assumptions.
Right. And so the other reason I always make very pessimistic, very low assumptions in ROI calculations is if I do encounter resistance, right? We come up with this crazy number like 32 million, right? You want to, you have to, if you haven't been conservative with your numbers, someone's going to jump on that, and say, well, there's no way you're going to get 50%. So I always try and be really, really conservative because it's like, well, do you think we'd get at least 25? Well, okay. Whatever the number is, you think they'd say, yeah, I mean, probably that's true. The other thing that I think is very important if you're presenting an ROI calculation is you've got to walk through all of the numbers. Now, you're not going to walk through everything you did because you probably spent hours, but you have to walk through, okay, so there are 10,000 abandonments and the average purchase is this. And because if you just walk in and say, we're going to save 32 million a year, they're just going to say, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Right. They're just going to say, no, you're not. So if you walk through it and say, so we've assumed, or we have data that there are 10,000 abandoned, and you just walk through each data point. So if they can't argue with that data point, and they can't argue with that one, and they can't argue with that one, and they can't argue with that one, then when you get to the end, they can't argue with the number, right? Because they understand where all the data or assumptions come from. So I think that's important too. All right, now you had questions?
Oh, yeah, questions.
Do you have questions?
Questions. I did have questions. Yeah, I remember my questions. So, the question had to do with the idea that right now, you like this is a good tool, perhaps.
Yeah.
To give to the, I think it's popular because UX teams are feeling the squeeze these days.
Yeah.
And I think they perhaps rightfully feel that there's no place for them. That basically they're just. They don't have, they think they have value, and maybe someone higher up thinks they have value, but everyone's just like, whatever.
Yeah.
So what's the move?
In the move.
What can someone in a UX team do with this, with some calculations to perhaps convince a higher up that, hey, no, guys, listen, this is super cool, I swear.
Or even not a higher up. I mean, maybe just convince, other people on the team.
Sure.
Well, that's what I mean. I would say, pick a project, pick a particular, UX technique that you want to do, whatever that is. We want to do a user test, or we want to do a redesign, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And walk through, the process. Figure out what's the measurement of success, what's the current data or current assumptions on that. If we did this UX work, how would that improve it? Just walk through an example one and share that with the team and try it out. I think you just got to try it out and start to get used to it. I have, by the way, 10 mistakes, myths, and misconceptions.
Oh.
That people have about ROI. Should we talk? Should I go through the 10?
Let's do it.
All right, we've kind of talked about some of these already.
One.
One is that there's an ROI formula. I mean, often people say, okay, so you're going to give us the ROI formula. Like there's a formula, like E equals MC squared.
Well, there is a formula.
Well, there is a formula.
It's like benefit times so like benefit per something times aggregate benefit.
Well,
equals ROI.
I mean, the ROI formula
it's like it's just so broad.
Is like net profit divided by the investment, which is net profit.
Well, I'm talking econ terms. You're talking business terms.
Yeah, I'm talking. Anyway, but it's not as though there's one formula that is what you use and you just plug your numbers into the one formula. I mean, you have to decide what your formula is. You have to, So there's not just one formula. It's not E equals MC squared and you go find the E and you go find the M and then you're done. All right. That's one. Another mistake I've seen people make is they use the metric that they have the data on.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we have data on this. Let's use that. But if that's not the important measurement, right, don't use it. Go find the data that's on the important, it's like, well, we're not really that interested in time saved by users. That's not important. But we have that data. So let's use that.
I think that's hard, though. It's hard you can't just whisk data out of thin air, especially if it's not reliable.
Well, okay, which is the next one. Number 3, which is if we don't have actual data, then we shouldn't do the calculation.
Okay.
I don't agree with that. If you don't actually have hard data on the thing that's important to you, of course, you could ask, if this is so important to us, why don't we have hard data on it? But if you don't have hard data on it, then make a good assumption. You're going to have to make a guess, and then you can always measure later and see if you were right about it.
Yeah.
But there are assumptions you have to make. All right, here's number 4 mistake. It's only worth it if the numbers would come up with are in the millions.
Right.
Like it's only worth it to do this calculation if if it's going to come up that we're going to save $32 million. No, that's not true. If you're looking at spending $25,000 to do some kind of user test, it might be worth it to find out that by spending the $25,000, you'll save $150,000 or you'll make $200,000 more. I mean, that's still useful even though it's not in the millions. Mm-hmm. Okay, number 5, we've mentioned before, failing to document your assumptions. That's a problem. Number 6, if we aren't sure we can measure it afterwards, actually measure the change in the abandon rate, then we shouldn't even bother. It's like, well, it'd be good if you can actually do the measurement and actually show that you saved, abandonment. But even if you're not sure that you can do whatever measurement is, it doesn't mean it's not worth it to go through the ROI calculation process. Right. It still might be a worthwhile thing to do. Okay. Number 7, you need just one metric. Like you have to, we have to decide. The metric is cart abandonment or amount of development time saved, or, we have to pick just one.
Right.
You can have more than one. Or number 8, the opposite problem, you need like 5 metrics. No. You need, 1, 2, or 3 of the ones that are the most important for you. Number 9, failing to get input on this from your key stakeholders.
Always need those key stakeholders.
You do. So whoever that, what is a key stakeholder? You're going to present your numbers to somebody or, a group of somebodies.
Yeah.
It might be your team. It might be your boss. It might be, somebody. Whoever it is, you need to get input from them before you do the calculation about these assumptions. Mm-hmm. Like we're doing this calculation and we're going to assume that, or we're doing this calculation and the important metric we think is, and get input from them ahead of time. You don't want to wait until, you go in and present and then find, although I've done that. I've, like with that example I gave you with the VPs at the bank, we actually didn't have input from them. And that's a risk, right? So it's always better to get input from them. And then number 10, mistakes, myths, and misconceptions is I'm not good at math. This is too hard, so I'm not going to do it. So, because I mean, really, there are a lot of people out there, and you're not one of them, Guthrie, and I'm not really one of them either, that really don't like math and get anxious about anything that has to do with the formula, and so they don't want to do it. And so I would say, try to get over that or involve someone in the calculation who likes math, because it really, it isn't that hard. It really is pretty much basic math. You can use a calculator. You don't have to do it longhand or in your head. And, I think it's worth it to get past that. So there you go. That's the mistakes, myths, and misconceptions about doing ROI.
I like it.
So I really think it's worth it to, try it out. Pick a simple project and one key indicator for your first one, and kind of go through and see what you come up with the calculations.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
And And then, you can have justification for all your UX work.
All your UX work.
Yeah. And if you really get stuck, well, some of your UX work, whatever you want to do the calculation on. If you get stuck, I always tell people this, we are available, right, for consulting or workshops. We'll come in and do a session with your team and help you work through these, the calculations and the assumptions and all that. So you don't have to do it alone. And we could even maybe use one of your fancy probability calculators, Guthrie.
I think everyone should use one of my probability calculators.
Well, we may have to. I don't think we can just post them because I think they take explanation. Maybe we should work on the UX of your ROI calculator.
I guess so.
Hey, we could calculate the ROI of working on the UX of your ROI. Okay, I've gone far enough on that.
Yeah, that is that's quite complicated there.
All right, there you have it. And if anyone wants more information, let us know.
Any other questions for me?
Fountain of ROI information. No, I think that's good. Guthrie, where can people reach us if they want to reach us about this or anything else?
info@dteamw.com.
Yeah.
What are you up to? What's on the
These days, you mean?
Yeah, what's the hot scoop?
I'm going on vacation for a week.
Yeah.
Right after this podcast. It's right after we stop doing this podcast episode. I'm going on vacation. I'm very excited about it. Because I live in the U.S. and not Sweden, I don't have a mandatory 5 weeks of vacation. Yeah. Also, I have my own business, so I tend to work all the time.
Yeah.
But I'm actually going to take a week of vacation, and I'm going to go sing jazz at a wonderful jazz camp for adults that I like to go to. And I'm really looking forward to it. That's what I'm up to. And then when I get back from that, we are, as you know, we're doing some, continuing to do some updates on some of our online training. So we've got new versions of online training coming out, and we're actually then going to work on some new online training, which is always exciting. So that's what I'm working on.
All right. Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
All right. Thanks, Guthrie. Thanks, everybody.
All right. I will talk to you all later. And thank you for the information on ROI.
You're very welcome.
All right. Bye.
Bye.